Welcome, welcome all to our Laudate Deum webinar. Fraternal greetings from the General Office of Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation of the Franciscan Order in Rome. It is a joy to have brothers and sisters from the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. For many of you, the day is just beginning. Others are finishing lunch, and for some, the day is ending. We thank you for having accepted our invitation, and we hope that in the next 60 minutes, we can become more aware and committed to the care of our common home. On October 4th, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, Pope Francis published the Apostolic Exhortation Laudate Deum. In this webinar, 3 Franciscans will give their views on this ecclesial document. The first presentation will be given by Friar Joseph, by Andrea Bizzosero, who is a professor of the Pontifical University of Rome. The second one by Jaime Campos from Chile. He is a director of this office of JPIC. And Friar Joseph Rosances will conclude, an American friar that was also a director of the JPIC office. The dynamic will have two moments. In the first, each of the speakers, in 10 minutes, will present their reflections on the Apostolic Exhortation Laudate Deum. It is good to know that you will be able to write in the chat and in the language of your choice your questions or comments. Since in the second phase of this webinar, the panelists will have 10 minutes to answer them. So that's why we've asked the presenters to take note of the questions and comments in the chat so that they can respond either generally or specifically to the questions and comments from the participants. So without any further ado, we are going to start with our interventions from our presenters, invited guests. Let me introduce you to Fray Andrea Bizzosero. Andrea was born in Italy in 1973. He is currently the Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy at the Pontifical University Antonianum in Rome, where he has taught courses in theology, but above all, philosophy, anthropology, history of modern philosophy, philosophy and Christianity, utopia, hope, and Christian hope, among others. He holds a doctorate in philosophy from the Antonianum University of Rome and a doctorate in theology from the Faculty of Theology of Lugano. He has also done specialization studies at the Faculty of Philosophy and Theology of the Sèvres Center in Paris, France. In his curriculum, he has several monographic publications, contributions in collective works and dictionaries, articles in magazines, reviews, and lectures in several conventions. We welcome Brother Andrea, who will present some reflections on the Apostolic Exhortation Laudate Deum. Go ahead.
Un saluto a tutti e a tutte.
Greetings to all of you, to all participants, whether it's a good morning or good evening, depending on what part of the world we are in right now together at this time. With regards to Pope Francis's text, in my brief presentation, I would just like to introduce a few aspects of this text, underlining certain excerpts that I consider significant, trying to provoke them, to challenge them in order to start a dialogue with each of you. I would like to start with the title of this text that everybody knows, which is Laudate Deum, an expression that Pope Francis himself wants to attribute to our dear St. Francis of Assisi, who precisely in his experience in the world and its beauties and controversies in the issues and the joys that were reserved to him, felt as a necessary challenge, but also as a characteristic, if he felt in his deep human experience to praise God. There's another aspect in this title that I'd like to underline. Laudate Deum is an apostolic exhortation addressed to all people of goodwill about the climate crisis. The subtitle simply recalls something that we are now used to, which represents a real novelty with regards to the regular ecclesial production. Pope Francis, as we saw in the same encyclical Laudato Si, chooses to open the borders of his recipients. He's breaking up, not addressing rather bishops or priests, but simply he's breaking up. Pope Francis wants to get into a dialogue. This subtitle suggests an important openness in the simplicity of this expression. He asks us to keep in mind, to keep in our commitment a tendency to the openness that wants to be unconditional to the other. It doesn't matter to highlight, it is not important to highlight our religious or cultural belonging. What really matters is to acknowledge that men and women in the entire world can be inhabited by a desire for goodness, a good will, a will that wants to take charge of the good of humanity, or as Laudato Si says, for the sake of the common home. This desire for good deeds is what should join the recipients of this letter. The subtitle also highlights the subject. This exhortation is addressed to all people of goodwill, and its subject is the climate crisis. As we'll see in this text, at least in its first part, we will realize that the climate crisis can be told, can be related to specific information, specific data that a chemical, economic, or other analysis can bring to the surface. But in this term, climate crisis, we simply suggest to observe the alterations of the climate issues, or must we expect something else? Or is it necessary to pay attention to other issues? The 6 chapters in this exhortation make us suggest that it's not just about analyzing the data of the global climate crisis as happened in the first chapter, but it is also necessary to once again face this phenomenon that is considered dramatic and that is represented by the growing technocratic paradigm. In the 3rd chapter, Pope Francis recalls the importance of reflecting on politics, specifically the international politics. That too, this state is weak in its propositions and innovations with regard to and the environmental issues. In the 4th chapter, the Pope wonders about the value and sometimes the causes that slowed down or raised obstacles to the progress of the climate conferences. The 5th, so what can we expect is the question we see in the 5th chapter from the Dubai conference. And then lastly, Pope Francis reminds us of the need to renew the spiritual motivations for an actual commitment to take care of our common home. I would briefly like to underline one aspect, which is the one we find in the 2nd chapter about the technocratic paradigm. It was a topic that was already raised in the encyclical letter Laudato Si, and here it represents a theme. This theme of the technocratic paradigm represents one of the most dramatic aspects, or even more decisive aspects, for those who wish to commit to the care of the common home for a responsibility toward the future generations. So what does this technocratic paradigm consist of? There are 2 aspects we must keep in mind. Technology, which is increasingly a technoscience, responds and corresponds to this human desire for continuous progress. As the Pope suggests, this precisely corresponds to the human desire to reach infinity, but the same tension can become a weapon that is maliciously threatening the actual human development, because in the technoscientific development, we come to a time when the human being renounces his own critical thinking and judgment and joins some technicians that regulate and govern the actual human desire. So the actual expression of technocracy is when technology or technicians become those who support the peoples. And what is the spirit that guides the action of these technicians, these technical people? In between the lines, Pope Francis suggests that these persons, these technical people who could lead us to a more rational development, conformity with goodness. Often enough are those who assign their strengths to the principle of maximum consumption, therefore maximum production, without recognizing the supreme good, the supreme interest of the person and the environment. So what is the word of hope that Francis gives to us in this letter? The word of hope is in this expression, investing in education, because there will be no lasting changes with no cultural changes without a maturity of the way of life and the social conventions. There's no possible will ever be possible. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Brother Andrea, for this very important key of this of the readings of the Laudato Deum. And now we are going to hear from the presentation of Friar Jaime Campos, who am I introducing at this time. Jaime Campos is born in Temuco, Chile in 1983. He is a member of the Franciscan province Santissima Trinidad of Chile. He was ordained in 2004 and he is ordained a priest November 28th of 2014. In 2008, he received a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the Jesuit University Alberto Hurtado and a licentiate in pastoral studies from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile in 2011. In his province, he has served as a provincial animator of justice, peace, and integrity of creation, administrator of the Colonial Art Museum of San Francisco in Santiago de Chile, and legal representative of the Franciscan Fund Sister Gabriela Mistral, in charge of the copyright of the poets. In addition, he has been part of the communication teams in his province. In 2015, he was appointed Director of the General Office of Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation of the Order, based in Rome. He will hold this position until August 30th of 2022. He was a member of the steering committee and co-founder of the Franciscan Migrant Network of the Americas. He is currently in charge of the Alvernia Retreat House and the president of the Alvernia Foundation in Chile, and he has been also appointed to the JPIC Commission of his province. Before giving the floor to Jaime, we want to remind you that you can actually ask your questions, write your questions and comments in the chat in order to allow all the presenters to answer them. Thank you, Daniel, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of whom are here. I also salute Andrea, who presented a very good introduction on this apostolical exhortation. First of all, I would like to I think that we should be grateful to Pope Francis for this exhortation, Laudate Deum, regarding the climate crisis. In spite of the motivation to actually publish this exhortation is based in a feeling of worry. The Pope says it. I feel that we are not reacting enough as the world that is really welcoming us is going into ruins and perhaps is about to fail. It's undoubted that this climate change is going to affect the lives and of families and many people. The reality is not very good. However, we appreciate Pope Francis for his loyalty and perseverance around anything that has to do with the care of the common house that was started in his magisterium 8 years ago with the encyclical of the Laudato Si. To think about Laudate Deum from the work of animation of the JPIC values carried out by the General Curia and so many other provincial offices in the order reminds me of the historical process that Franciscan friars have carried out in different meetings and congresses. The theme of ecology began to be present in the formal reflection of the order some 35 years ago in the Plenary Council of 1988 in Bangalore, India. In the second part of the final document, in the second one, when it listed the three priorities of the order, in the second one, the option for the poor, justice and peace, it says that the awareness of the friars on this priority is on the right track. The results are still modest and vary from region to region, and later adds ecology is also an issue of concern to the International Council of JPIC and to a greater number of friars. 35 years ago, the order, the reflection was already aware of the topic of ecology. I wanted to begin in my participation in this seminar from a historical perspective. In brief, in order to appreciate the insistence and the perseverance of Pope Francis on the theme of care for the common home and the climate crisis, since the Laudato Si is not a passing fad. I also wanted to show that as order and church, we have been making a process, slow perhaps, but this theme is not alien to our reflection, our decisions, nor to our action. At present, as the Pope says in his exhortation, no matter how much we may try to deny, hide, dissimulate, or relativize it, the signs of climate change are there, even more evident. No one can ignore that in recent years we have witnessed extreme phenomena, frequent periods of unusual heat, drought, and other groans of the earth that are only some palpable expressions of a silent illness that affects us all. The Pope goes on to point out that there has been no lack of people who have tried to make fun of this observation. This attitude mentioned by the Pope can be found in some persons and groups within our church. And sometimes this can discourage us or create a certain anxiety. Rather, I think it should encourage us to continue to insist on personal and community awareness of the urgent climate crisis. Personal and communal awareness has been the constant call of Pope Francis in Laudato Si, to become aware, for example, that everything is connected, and in the other encyclical, in Fratelli Tutti, to be aware that no one can be saved alone, that it is only possible to save ourselves together. As Franciscans, we are invited to become aware of the climate crisis, to know that we are part of the problem and that therefore we can be part of the solution. I ask myself, and I also ask you, how aware are we of this reality within the Franciscan family? I think that one of the specific characteristics of Laudate Deum is the direct and concrete way that Pope Francis used to express his concern about the slow and sometimes almost non-existent reaction to the climate crisis. On the one hand, he recognizes that there is a greater sensitivity to the situation, which we can also perceive within the order of the Franciscan family. But I fully agree with the Pope when he states that we need to overcome the logic of appearing as sensitive beings and at the same time not having the courage to produce substantial changes. In Laudate Deum, the strength of the call of Pope Francis for the care of what is weak and for the care of the common home becomes more evident. Do we have the courage to assume the responsibility to produce substantial changes in our lifestyle? Substantial changes in our lifestyle, small changes, can be a positive response to the climate crisis issue. I believe that small personal and community actions can contribute to creating a greater awareness of the need of cultural changes. And here I agree with Andrea when what he was saying in his presentation, that he was echoing the cultural changes, the cultural change that is our way of being and relating to God, to people, to ourselves, and to all creation. Pope Francis reminds us that there are no lasting changes without cultural changes, without a maturation in the way of life and in the convictions of societies. And there are no cultural changes without changes in people. So therefore, the challenge for all of us is not only to think of isolated and concrete actions, but actions that allow us to generate the processes of cultural change that have a projection in time and are achievable. So I believe that our spirituality from the gift of fraternity and minority can help us a lot in the changes that we need to make. To know ourselves as minors and to recognize the place of God in history and in our own life, to recognize ourselves as creatures in the midst of others and not gods, will allow us to accept the invitation to praise God, Laudate Deum, because a human being who pretends to occupy the place of God becomes the worst danger to himself. Thank you.
Gracias a ti, Rey Jaime. Ahora vamos a escuchar
Thank you, Jaime. Now let's hear it from Brother Joseph Rosansky. Friar Joe, as he is known, is born in New Jersey in 1949. He joined the former province holy name based in New York. He receives a master's degree in theology in 1975. After his ordination to the priesthood in 1976, he was sent to the mission in Brazil, where he worked primarily in education. Upon his return to the United States in 1985, he received a master's degree in economics. Much of his service as a Franciscan has been in the formation of Franciscan friars. From 2005 to 2015, he serves as director of the General Office for Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation based at the OFM General Curia in Rome. After his return to the United States from Rome, he served on the board of directors of Franciscans International for 7 years. The last 6 years, he served as president of that board. He currently resides at the St. Vincent Convent in San Diego, one of the 2 post-novitiate houses of the newly founded province of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Welcome, Joe, and thank you for being a part of this space of reflection.
First of all, I apologize for coming late. I think we changed the hours by 1 hour, and I am sorry that I came late. In any case, I'm here. Brothers and sisters, may God give you peace. There is no doubt that the message of Pope Francis in Laudate Deum is urgent. He reflects on the 8 years since publication of Laudato Si and notes that the reaction to his call to address the effects of human-caused global warming has been very weak. He writes, "I have realized that our responses have not been adequate while the world in which we live is collapsing and may be nearing the breaking point." The tone of Laudate Deum betrays the frustration of the Pope. He declares that it is no longer possible to doubt the human origin of climate change. He names countries and industries which stand out as culprits in this critical situation and begs all people of goodwill to take collective action to confront the imminent danger to humanity and to the earth. He highlights this request by stating, "We must move beyond the mentality of appearing to be concerned, but not having the courage needed to produce substantial changes. We need a process that is both personal and communal, and it must be drastic, intense, and count on the commitment of everyone." At the same time, however, his message is hopeful. Regarding the global conference on climate, Pope Francis soberly discusses their successes and failures. Despite the mixed results to date, he adds, "To say that there is nothing to hope for would be suicidal, for it would mean exposing all humanity, especially the poorest, to the worst impacts of climate change." He outlines a process that will foster hope in this dire situation. It calls for major political decisions on the national and international levels, but he insists that such a process must count on multilateralism from below, which will allow personal initiative to combine with political decision-making. Pope Francis notes that demands that arise from activists and the commitment of individuals to live out the values needed to confront the present situation can end up pressuring the sources of power. We cannot be incapacitated by climate despair, feeling I can do nothing in the face of our problems. We must find ways, personally and communally, to accept the challenge posed by Pope Francis. He reminds all people of faith that authentic faith not only gives strength to the human heart, but also transforms life, transfigures our goals, and sheds light on our relationship to others and with creation as a whole. However, we must understand that the Pope is not asking us to reflect on our situation theoretically. As he points out, we can no longer doubt the fact that climate change is caused by human activity. Instead, he is strongly challenging each of us to search for effective solutions to the crisis at all levels. What must we do to implement this appeal coming from the Pope? First, each of us should carry out a traditional exercise of our faith, an examination of conscience. On a personal level, do I accept the analysis of Pope Francis? Have I made every effort to understand our current situation? Have I allowed myself to be challenged by those who are trained in science, who overwhelmingly agree that the climate crisis we face is a result of human activity? Does my lifestyle reflect a concern for the fact that resources are limited and that all people deserve a chance to share in these resources? Am I willing to change my lifestyle radically to confront the current crisis? What steps have I already taken to adapt the way I interact with people and the world around me? Many of us have responded enthusiastically to those challenges on a personal level, by recycling, by reducing pollution and waste, by finding other ways to promote a better approach to the way we live our lives. The Pope lauds these effects, but points out that they alone are not enough. He says that the most effective solutions will not come from individual efforts alone, but above all, from major political decisions on the national and international level. However, we need to realize that there are no lasting changes without cultural changes, and there are no cultural changes without personal change. Individual, household, and local efforts are important insofar as they help to create a new culture regarding the unfulfilled responsibilities of the political sector and indignation at the lack of interest shown by the powerful. But such efforts are not sufficient to bring about the change of direction needed to overcome our world crisis. In this way, the Pope moves beyond a personal commitment to change. He notes that many groups and organizations within civil society help to compensate for the shortcomings of the international community, its lack of coordination in complex situations, and its lack of attention to fundamental human rights. He extols activists who work with and support one another and offer a model of how it is possible to control and influence political power at all levels: international, national, regional, and municipal. The Pope's inclusion of these activists is a recognition of the need for an increased involvement involvement in the political process on the part of the Christian faithful and of all people of goodwill. We are called to take up our duty to protect the life and health of our society and its institutions, seeking a comprehensive approach that includes the critical political dimension in dealing with social justice and environmental issues. The Pope has called to task the developed nations for an unthinking commitment to the technocratic paradigm and an irresponsible use of resources. He also called to task large corporations like mining and the fossil fuel industry for their commitment to short-term interest and profit. The bottom line for the Pope is that nations, corporations, and individuals must not place their own interests above the global common good. Further, as noted above, we must move beyond the mere appearance of being concerned about our situation to a sincere desire to produce substantial change, backed by the courage needed to bring such change about. I presume that those of you who are listening are already working at change at the personal level, and that many of you are also working at the political level. My concern at this moment is for those who are still at the personal level, but looking for ways to move beyond. To you, I make the following suggestions. In 2015, the Pope addressed the popular movements in Bolivia and called for respectful collaboration with these same movements. We must search out the popular movements in our own regions, especially those that are led by young people and oriented toward climate justice, and find ways to collaborate with them. We must become aware of the Franciscan organizations that exist in our region or country or internationally, which are already engaged in the process of political change. In the United States, where I live, we might look at FAN, the Franciscan Action Network. At the international level, we can look at FI, Franciscans International, which is our Franciscan NGO at the United Nations. All branches of the Franciscan family must make a commitment to engage in the socio-political dimension of life as an integral part of our formation programs, both initial and ongoing. We must seek to share with one another the efforts we are undertaking and invite one another to become part of a common Franciscan approach to dealing with our world crisis. All Franciscans must incorporate the socio-political dimension as an integral part of our ministries, inviting those with whom we serve to commit themselves as well to this dimension. Maybe 3 months after our initial examination of conscience, we might commit ourselves to a second examination to see if we have contacted or joined a group involved in the political sphere, like Franciscans International. Brothers and sisters, let us begin again, because up until now, we have done nothing. Thank you.
Excelente, Fray.
Excellent, brother. Thank you, Joe, for these provoking thoughts around the reading of the Apostolic Exhortation Laudate Deum. We have 10 minutes now to dialogue, to answer some of the questions that you have written in the chat, the questions, the comments. So there was a direct question to Brother Andrea. I'm sure it has been answered, but perhaps if this can actually be public for our brother Silvio da Silvia, your opinion, also your opinion regarding this, Brother Andrea.
Yes, I will not read the question again. Perhaps everybody read it. Silvio de Silva, whom I thank for his question, asks whether hyperproduction doesn't risk generating a situation of irrationality. There, does putting production before the person leads us to a state of silliness or of being of bestiality. This is a major risk, the fact of not recognizing a value that is the value of the person, but to give the primacy to production, which becomes hyperproduction, paradoxically induced and determined and defined based on the meeting of the needs. That is why it should be important to reconsider the importance of the needs of the human being, because it is true that the human person is rational and desires, but also needs. And as long as we do not appropriately consider this dimension that is forgotten or silenced, is intercepted by the market logic that becomes a logic of production for hyperconsumption, leading the human being to discover him or herself hyperactivated in his needs. So we can continue discussing the ecological conversion. We can create beautiful electrical vehicles, but we don't realize that in fact we are once again soliciting, animating, or creating new needs, which ultimately will make us implode into an unmanageable situation. So the dimension of the needs is not to be neglected if we actually want to perform a real reflection of this about this change of paradigms. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea. Also, the questions and answers, we have some questions. If Brother Jaime can actually answer. He's frozen. Okay, so there are a few questions in the chat. Your comments, please.
It asks, say more on cultural changes and something about the disunity that is being caused by the stronger statements of the Pope. I agree with both of those. I agree with the comment on disunity. I think probably what's going to happen, each of us need to deal with it at our own in our own cultures, because I think that the way we will address it is going to change. I know here in the US, we have some very strong movements that would be anti the sentiments of the Pope, not necessarily directly, but the way that they live is a challenge to what the Pope offers as the problems of our time. So it would be pretty difficult. You know, the cultural changes, I think, is something that is beyond the personal, but it means the way that we live and interact together. I'm sorry that I came on late, but when I heard what Jaime was saying, it seems that he was addressing some of that. You know, it's this level that is intermediate between the political and the not intermediate. It's a level that all of us live in. We breathe our culture, but we must make ourselves aware of it. The third question that I saw in English, I think, is something that maybe, Danielle, you'll be able to address. It was a question about a very concrete way that we can address what we've been talking about is participation in COP28. And the question is, what are we doing to prepare as Franciscans to be there? You know, if we're going to be there, we're going to show, you know, that we support what the Pope is saying, that we would like to make it real. But I think that is a very political arena, a place, you know, where we could hopefully work together as Franciscans from across the world to address those things that all of us have been talking about. So I don't know, maybe you could say something about that, Danielle, because I am not involved at the moment at the international level.
Sí. Con respecto a la participación franciscana,
Well, regarding the Franciscan participation in a COP, the last editions, there has been the participation of Franciscan brothers through the accreditation that gives us a Franciscan International. This year, unfortunately, we will not have that presence. We will not be represented directly as Franciscan. But the good news that we have received is that who is going to be there is Pope Francis. So I think that this is very important. His presence, his presentations, and what you also have commented in this webinar. I think that this is a call for attention to do something, that we cannot continue giving the same responses, answers, because they are very few. The bad news is that the Franciscan will not participate in the next COP, but the good news is that Pope Francis will be there, and he will participate for the first time in a COP.
Is that we find ways throughout the world to invite our Franciscan brothers and sisters to manifest themselves, to send letters, messages of support to the Pope, and to make sure that at our local levels, we're following it and helping the people in our area to follow it. Thank you.
sí, sí, así es, Joe. Así
Yes, that's it, Joe. And mainly through the social network, that we don't want the COP to not be known. And I think that we hope that us as well as Franciscan to be able to influence. I think that the social networks is a good way of doing so, and also what you say to support the Pope and his participation. We have another 5 minutes. Brother James, would you like to provide some responses? Yes, I see one from Miguel Angel. He's saying hi from Colombia. He says, well, what would be the manifestation of those cultural changes? Well, you know, and on the other hand, what is the Franciscan charism contributing to this cultural change? Well, hi Joe, welcome. I hadn't seen you before. I would like to start with this word, the alternative. From this word, alternative, I think that today we have to rethink this word, alternative. What are the alternative, and what is the Franciscan perspective? I mentioned that the fraternity and the minority as a Franciscan value is an opportunity, and I am going to expand my response based on this, because of course we say this among ourselves, but we do not explain it. what Miguel Angel is saying here about the consumerism and the technocratical paradigm, I think they are associated. Why? Because to produce more, you must have more technology, and therefore, in a way, everything is related in itself. So why do we have to produce more? Because we have to consume more. So this way of consuming, this consumerism that we think that the goods are illimited, I think that this is the problem. So how to find an alternative? And from the fraternity, for example, in recognizing the fraternities as a universal value, not only the human being, but the entire creation. This should take you to be more responsible, be more fair, and the alternative for Francis is the poverty. So how to think from there? How to think of the changes from that foundation, and even more so beyond that. I think that the Pope also mentioned this in the encyclical, to look at the original uh, population in this very distinct idea of progress. I think that in the Western world, the unlimited consumerism, it goes beyond. So the how the Christ who poor and crucified is a contribution nowadays that is an alternative to a world that wants to have a more financial power. And I think that in the end, I think that this could be an answer, could be an alternative model to that this would produce among ourselves first a bigger engagement in harmony, and aware that we are all brothers, as the gospel says, and St. Francis of Assisi says it too. So perhaps those are more concrete ideas. Excellent. Thank you so much. We appreciate the comment that Laura Ocampo writes from Argentina. As a Franciscan, to have those JPIC commissions in our parishes that change the lifestyle, and to animate the pastoral. Also Massimo Cantelli, that of course we don't have time, because we don't have time, we are going to now finish our meeting. We did not want to talk about the entire text of the document. We thank you. We thank all the presenters to have shared different points of view of this Laudate Deum. Thank you to each one of you, brothers and sisters and participants. In the next few days, the recording will be available in the YouTube channel of the General Office of the JPIC for the ones who have access to this reflection time of the Laudate Deum. We wish you a good day to many of you, a good afternoon to some of you, and a good night to others. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, our translators. May God bless all of us. Peace and well.